All right, everybody, going to walk through how to do this practice quiz on classes. In this one, we're going to make a step tracking system that's going to be using the StepCounter class. Basically, what needs to happen here is we need to set a minimum threshold in order for us to be considered active. And then we're going to record steps, and we're going to, decide, keep track of how many total steps we've walked. We need to keep track of like how many active days we had. There's two different ways of doing this. I'm going to do, I think, the harder way first, the harder but more common way that students choose to do this. And then we'll look back at how we can do this in an easier way. So the first way we'll be using just kind of a couple of variables, ints, days, that kind of thing. And then I'll do a second version using an array list. I think the array list is easier, but I think it's easier to actually make, but it's harder to explain why it's a good choice right away. So I'm going to go with, I'll go with two different versions on this one. Okay, so anyways, in this, you need to have two constructors. So we haven't talked, I think, too much about two constructors. I wouldn't include this on your quiz. But basically, when you do two constructors, you're saying, okay, you have two different ways of setting up some values for our code. In this case, really what we need to be setting up is, like, what are the minimum number of steps needed to be active? Either we pass in a value to determine how many steps we need, or we just default it to 7,000, okay? And then we need to have these three methods. We need to be able to add steps to it. We need to be able to check how many active days we have, and we need to do average steps. Okay, so this is a tricky problem. This does come from the AP test, so it is a kind of relevant problem for doing classes, but it is a challenging one. So let's look at how we're going to do this. Okay, so I have this set up already. The first thing that I want to do is I just want to make this not so mad at me. I think the thing that you have to realize is that we need to set up, like, the first thing, the value that we're getting in here, this 10,000, is like the threshold required for us to be active. So let's say, what does it say active? So I need to set up first my variables. This is going to be a kind of back and forth process. I will definitely be adding more variables to here, but just to begin with, I'm going to set that one variable. Actually, I'm going to say, like, how about let's say min steps. I think that's a good way of doing it, because that's like the minimum steps required to be active. I'm just going to take in an int value here. I'm going to call it m. I could call it whatever I want, but I tend to just do it with the first letter because I don't have to worry about having two variables with the same name. I can just say m here and say min steps is equal to m. Okay, so if you pop back over to here, we can see at least the first one is no longer mad at us. Now we need to return active days. I think for me, what I'm going to do, what this tells me, I don't know how I'm going to figure active days, but for right now, I know we need to have like active, like num, how about num active days? Give it some meaningful variable names. Whenever I create a variable, I'm going to need to initialize it in here. So I'm going to say num active days is equal to 0. And then, okay, so I need to do something in my main method that's going to return the number of active days. So I have a variable for active days. I just need to say something like public int, like active days. Okay. And we're going to return num active days. Okay. Again, this isn't doing anything right now because it's just going to be 0, but I'm at least setting up these values and getting myself like set up in the right spot. All right, I need to do average steps. Okay, so again, all right, this tells me a couple things. Average steps, okay. And I can look later on, it's going to say like average steps is just how many steps did you take per day. Okay, so that means if I need to take the number of steps per day, I need to have private int like total days. And I probably need to have private int total steps. So I'm going to go back and set up these values inside of my constructor. And then I need to say total days is equal to 0. To begin with, the initial values of these should both be 0. And then when I do public double, I think it's average steps. Average steps, I need to return, and this will be a little bit of an error, but return total days, total steps divided by total days. I know for sure I need to make this a double. If I divide an int by an int, I should automatically be thinking, okay, that's going to give me an int as a result, so let me do that. There's going to be some errors with this that I'll come back and fix. Maybe some of you who have done this already know what the errors are going to be. Okay, now we're going to get into the tricky spot. We need to add daily steps. Okay, so this is actually the most consequential part of our code. We can see in here, we can get some like hints right away here. There's nothing getting returned for this. We're going to add 9,000 steps. This is going to be not considered to be active. Both, yeah. So what we need to do, we need to really consider public void add steps, add daily steps. We need to take in a value for sure. I'm going to just call this int s. And okay, so now here's what we need to do. What things do we have to update in here? We definitely don't have to update minimum steps. That's kind of set in stone as our threshold. But these three we probably could update. One thing we could do is like if we're adding daily steps, then the total number of like total days should increase by 1. You know, we're adding in the amount of steps we had today. Okay, that means that our total days should increase by 1. Similarly in here, our total steps should also increase. Total steps should also increase by S amount. Okay. Now the last part, well, that's really the second one, number of active days. This should either increase by 1 or not increase at all. Okay, how do we decide whether this should increase? Well, it really depends on how many steps we pass in. If the number of steps we pass in is bigger than, and I should probably say bigger than or equal to, the minimum number of steps required, then active days, active days should increase. That's actually, so this is the hardest part of the code, is thinking through like, okay, I have these variables, when are these going to get added? Like, when are these going to get updated? And really, mostly it should be happening inside of add daily steps. We're going to increase total days, we're going to increase total steps, and we're going to increase the number of active days. And actually, this is going to get the majority of this done for us. There are going to be some issues in here. Like if we try and run this, I know this one's not working. Let's comment this out for a second. Oh, no, it's too far. Let's get that back and let's run this. I know I'm getting like not a number here. I'm actually surprised it's not breaking for us. That's interesting. So I'm getting not a number on this one because I'm taking the average steps before I've recorded anything. So when I get down to here, when I try and do the average number of steps, I'm dividing number of steps 0 by 0, and I'm going to get not a number. So I need to do something in here like if total days is equal to 0, return 0. If you haven't recorded anything, don't bother to check to see, don't bother to do the math, just return 0. Now if we run this, things are actually working out pretty well here. I think it's easier if we look at the document just to kind of compare. Let's see, we have 0, 0, 3 zeros, 7,000, 3 zeros, 7,000. Then we have a 1, a 9,000, 2, and then this. Okay, so some errors you might find in here, like if you didn't convert, if you did integer division, you might get this as a whole number, but I took care of that here. All right, the last issue that we need to do is really the rest of this code. We won't do this on the quiz, but we could have a second constructor. And all this means is that when we build our step counter, there's 2 different ways we could build it. We could set this up and say, you know, minimum steps is going to be something that we take in from the user, from the main code to define. We could also say, well, I still need to, I'm not going to just take anything in from the user or from the main code. I still need to declare all these things, but I'm just going to say by default, minimum number of steps is going to be 7,000. And if I do that and run my code, oh, I should comment these back in, that's going to be the last major thing you have to fix. So we know all these are right, and then we should 0, 1, 7,000. 0, 1, 7,000. Okay, so that's it for the first explanation. This one is tricky. This whole, like, doing the add step method, add daily steps, is a tricky thing to do. You really have to think through, like, okay, how am I going to keep track of this? All right. Let's see. All right, so you can stop the video there if you want. Otherwise, I'm going to explain how to do this in a much easier way. So we're going to do a quicker version of this. And I'm going to do this with an array list. Integer steps. Because there's actually a much easier way to do this, but then I need to import java.util.star. And let's see, I still need to do private int min steps. I'm going to try and go through this quicker. We're still going to do our constructor, public step counter. We still need to do public step counter, but in this case, I'm going to take an int s. In both cases, I still need to say min steps is equal to, in this case, 7,000, 700, 7,000. In this case, I need to do min steps is equal to s. And then down here, let's see what else we need to do. Oh, we need to initialize steps here. So we need to say steps is equal to new array list over here. And we'll also do that right here. Okay, so we're going to keep track of everything in an array list. And we're going to do this a little bit differently. Let me skip around here a little bit. Let's just show how we're going to do add daily steps. I'm going to do public void add daily steps. It's It's going to take in an int s, and I'm going to say steps.add s. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let the array list do all the work. I'm going to just, it's a little bit differently. Rather than like modifying number of active days as I take in steps, I'm actually going to calculate that just whenever someone asks for it. So this is all I need to do for add daily steps in this case. And then when I need to do public int like active days, now active days is a little bit trickier. What I need to do is loop through my steps array list, and I need to count the number of days that are active. So I'm going to say int count is equal to 0 to begin with. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing here. And then what I need to do is for int steps in int step count in steps. So it's a little bit trickier. Like now we're placing more of the burden on active days to return us a correct value. So in here we need to say if that step count that we get out is bigger than or equal to the minimum number of steps, then count, let's say, I'm going to do this like num active, just to have a clearer name on this. So if the step count is bigger than the number of minimum steps, the number of active needs to increase by 1. And that's really all we need to do. And then we can just return num active. Okay, and so now, again, we've kind of shifted a lot of the responsibility here to active days. All right, so that's going to take care of this. We still need to do average steps. So again, this is going to be a little bit more work because I'm not keeping track of the total number of steps or the total number of days. So what I need to do here is I'll still need to say, I now need to check like the if steps.size. So if the array list is 0. Oh, so like a lot of similar things. I shouldn't import anything weird. A lot of similar ideas. If the size is 0, I need to return 0. Otherwise, I need to, maybe I'll make an int average. It's going to be equal to, I need to find like sum. Int sum is equal to 0. So again, a lot more work going on here for the array list, but just different ways of doing this. For int step count in steps, sum plus equals step count. And then we're going to need to return sum divided by steps.size. And I need to multiply this all by 1.0 times that. Okay, so this should work. We're going to get the sum, and then we're going to return sum divided by the number of steps. And I don't think I did the second constructor. Oh no, I did the second constructor already. So this should all work. Yeah, so we're getting all the same values. Okay, so different ways of doing this. In this case, again, we're putting more of the emphasis onto, we're just active days is now, or excuse me, add daily steps is now a very simple method, but active days becomes more complex, and as does average steps. So there's different ways of doing this. You can consider the pros and the cons. I think in some ways this is a little more direct because you're really clearly, really it's because add daily steps is now a very simple thing. Instead of it doing like a bunch of kind of hidden things like increasing active days and doing all this other work, it's really just adding steps, and then finding active days is just a very straightforward process of looking through that array list. But pluses and minuses to both.